In a bustling spaceport on the edge of human territory, an old freighter captain was going about his usual business. His name was Elias Varn, a man with weathered skin and eyes that carried the weight of countless journeys. He wasn't rich or famous, just someone trying to make ends meet by hauling cargo across the stars. Life in space had taught him one thing: never trust anything too good to be true. One evening, as Elias sat in the cockpit of his ship, the Iron Gale, sipping stale coffee, something unusual happened. A distress signal crackled through the comms system. At first, it sounded like static, but then words began to emerge, broken, faint, yet unmistakable. Warning ... ignored ... Deathworlder moves. The message looped over and over again, sending chills down Elias's spine. It wasn't just the cryptic nature of the transmission that bothered him, it was the tone. Whoever sent it sounded terrified. Elias leaned back in his chair, scratching his stubbled chin. Deathworlder, he muttered aloud. Everyone knew what? Deathworlds were planets so hostile to life that stepping foot on them could mean instant death. Acid rain, toxic atmospheres, monstrous creatures, they were nightmares wrapped in rock and dirt. But this message mentioned something more specific, something alive. A Deathworlder? What did that even mean? Curiosity gnawed at him. Most people would have deleted the signal and moved on, chalking it up to some prankster or malfunctioning equipment. But Elias wasn't most people. Beneath his gruff exterior lay a streak of stubbornness and maybe a little greed. If there was trouble, there might also be profit. Rumors had been circulating about valuable minerals hidden on Kepler 942b, the planet where the signal originated. Maybe this distress call was a ticket to striking gold or whatever passed for gold out here. He decided to investigate, but didn't. Want to go alone? Space was no place for lone wolves, especially not when danger loomed. So he gathered his crew. First there was Myra, the ship's engineer. She was sharp-tongued and skeptical, always quick to point out flaws in Elias's plans. Then came Rin, the pilot, whose temper often matched the speed of her flying. And finally Jox, the biologist. Quiet and reserved, Jox rarely spoke unless it was about his work. Something about him seemed off, though no one could quite put their finger on it. When Elias told them about the distress signal, the reactions were mixed. Myra crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. You're joking, right? That planet's a death trap. Rin smirked, clearly intrigued by the idea of adventure, while Jock simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Despite their doubts, they agreed to join him. After all, none of them had much else waiting for them back home. As the Iron Gale prepared for departure, local authorities tried to dissuade them. No one comes back from Kepler 942b. One officer warned, his voice heavy with concern. But Elias brushed it off. Warnings were part of the job. Danger was part of the job. And if you let fear stop you, you'd never get anywhere. The journey to the planet took several days. At first, everything seemed normal. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, and the stars outside stretched endlessly. But as they approached Kepler 942b, strange things started happening. Equipment began malfunctioning without explanation. Static buzzed through the comms, drowning out attempts at communication. Even stranger, faint whispers echoed through the ship, though no one admitted to hearing them except Elias. He chalked it up to fatigue, but deep down he knew better. Finally, they reached the planet. As they broke through the atmosphere, the view left them speechless. Kepler 942b was unlike any world they'd ever seen. Towering forests of glowing fungi stretched as far as the eye could see, their bioluminescent caps casting an eerie green light across the landscape. Rivers of shimmering liquid pulsed like veins, flowing unnaturally fast. The air was thick with spores, making breathing feel almost intoxicating. It was beautiful and horrifying. Setting down on the surface felt like stepping into another dimension. Every sound was amplified, every movement exaggerated. Strange creatures darted between the trees, moving faster than should be possible. They weren't aggressive, at least not yet, but their presence added to the tension hanging over the group. Jox immediately set to work documenting the environment. He marveled at how interconnected everything seemed. Plants reacted to touch. Animals communicated using flashes of light, and the ground itself appeared to breathe. It was as if the entire planet was alive, watching them. Meanwhile, Mara focused on repairing their damaged sensors, which had gone haywire upon landing. She traced the source of the distress signal to a nearby location, leading them deeper into the forest. As they trekked forward, the sense of unease grew stronger. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and the air felt heavier with each step. Eventually, they stumbled upon the wreckage of another ship. Its hull was scorched, its interior gutted. Inside, they found remnants of a research team that had vanished decades ago. Logs scattered around revealed experiments gone horribly wrong. Scientists had tried to harness the planet's biomechanical properties only to unleash something they couldn't control. Scrawled on the walls in jagged handwriting were warnings. "It knows we're here." Night fell quickly, plunging the forest into darkness. Bioluminescent lights illuminated the surroundings, creating an otherworldly glow. But beauty soon gave way to terror. A low growl rippled through the trees, growing louder with each passing moment. Something was coming, and it didn't sound friendly. Panic set in as the crew scrambled to retreat. They barely made it back to the Irongale before realizing their nightmare wasn't over. Something or someone had followed them aboard. The moment the crew stepped back onto the Irongale, they could feel it. Something wasn't right. The air inside the ship felt heavier, charged with an energy that made their skin prickle. It was subtle at first, just a faint hum in the walls, like the ship itself was alive and uneasy. Mara, the engineer, frowned as she ran her fingers over the control panel. Lights flickered sporadically, and the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees every minute. She muttered under her breath, "This isn't normal." Elias, the captain, tried to shake off the growing unease. He had seen his fair share of strange things in space, but this was different. The forest outside had been unsettling. Enough with its glowing fungi, pulsing rivers, and creatures that moved too fast to follow. But now, the feeling of being watched lingered even within the supposed safety of their ship. He glanced at Rin, the pilot, who was gripping the edge of her seat, her knuckles white. Her usual bravado was gone, replaced by a tense silence. Jax, the biologist, was the quietest of them all. He stood near the viewport, staring out at the alien landscape as if he were searching for something or someone. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. When Elias asked him what was wrong, Jax hesitated before speaking. "I've seen ecosystems like this before," he said softly, "but never one so aware. This planet doesn't just react to us, it anticipates." U.S., that thought sent a chill through everyone. Anticipation meant intelligence, and intelligence meant danger. They didn't have time to dwell on it, though, because the ship's systems began acting up again. Alarms blared without warning, only to cut off mid-sound. Panels lit up with error. Messages that made no sense. Myra cursed loudly, slamming her fist against the console. "It's like the ship's possessed," she snapped. Rin stood abruptly and grabbed a flashlight. "We're not sitting here waiting for whatever's messing with us to show itself," she said firmly. "I'm checking the cargo bay." No one argued. If something or someone had snuck aboard, they needed to know. The group split up cautiously. Rin headed toward the cargo bay, while Myra stayed behind to monitor the controls. Elias and Jax decided to search the rest of the ship, starting with the living quarters. As they moved through the narrow corridors, the lights dimmed intermittently, plunging them into brief moments of darkness. Every creak of the metal hull sounded louder than it should have, and every shadow seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at it. When they reached the sleeping quarters, they found nothing unusual, at least, not at first glance. But then Elias noticed something strange. One of the bunks had been disturbed. Blankets were torn, pillows scattered across the floor. There were claw marks gouged into the wall, deep enough to leave jagged edges. Elias exchanged a worried glance with Jax. Whatever had come aboard, it wasn't human. Meanwhile, Rin had reached the cargo bay. She pushed open the heavy door, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. At first, everything looked fine. Crates of supplies were stacked neatly against the walls, untouched. But as she stepped further inside, she heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her heart pounded in her chest as she swung the flashlight around, trying to pinpoint the source, and then she saw it. For a split second, something moved in the shadows. It was too fast to get a clear look, but what she glimpsed froze her in place. A grotesque creature, part insect, part reptile, with too many legs and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Its body seemed stitched together from mismatched parts, like it had been assembled rather than born. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, melting into the darkness. Rin stumbled backward, nearly dropping her flashlight. She wanted to shout, to call for help, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she bolted out of the cargo bay and ran straight into Myra, who was coming to check on her. "What happened?" Myra demanded, grabbing Rin's shoulders too. "Steady her. There's something in there," Rin gasped, pointing wildly toward the cargo bay. "Something, wrong." Myra didn't waste time asking questions. She armed herself with a wrench and marched toward the cargo bay, Rin trailing reluctantly behind her. Inside, everything was still, too still. The crates hadn't been disturbed, and there was no sign of the creature Rin described. But Myra knew better than to believe her eyes. Space travel taught you one thing above all else: trust your instincts. And hers were screaming that something was very, very wrong. Back in the main cabin, Elias and Jox regrouped with the others. They shared what they'd found, the claw marks, the eerie disturbances, and listened as Rin recounted her encounter. Nobody laughed or dismissed her story. Fear hung thick in the air, palpable and suffocating. They were trapped on a ship that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Jox finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "If what I think is happening is true—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This isn't just an animal we're dealing with. This is something connected to the planet itself, something intelligent." Elias frowned. "You mean like the planet's fighting back?" Jox nodded slowly. "In a way, yes. Think about it. Everything we've seen, the forest, the rivers, the creatures, they're all part of one massive organism. And we're intruders. We triggered something when we landed." That explanation didn't sit well with anyone. Fighting back implied intent, malice even. And if the planet truly saw them as a threat, how far would it go to eliminate them? As the hours dragged on, the situation worsened. The ship's systems continued to malfunction, forcing Myra to work tirelessly to keep them operational. The temperature dropped even lower, making it hard to focus. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. Whispers echoed faintly through the vents, voices speaking in languages none of them recognized. Then came the dreams. Each member of the crew drifted off at some point, exhaustion overtaking fear. But sleep offered no relief. Nightmares plagued them, vivid and personal. Elias found himself standing in front of a burning building, the screams of his estranged daughter ringing in his ears. He woke drenched in sweat, guilt crushing his chest. Myra relived the moment her younger brother sacrificed himself to save her during a mining accident, his final words haunting her waking thoughts. Even stoic Jox broke down, mumbling incoherently about experiments gone wrong and promises he couldn't keep. Rin was the first to admit what they were all thinking. "This thing knows us," she said, her voice shaking. "It's using our memories against us." Fear turned to paranoia as the crew began questioning each other. Was the entity influencing them? Planting doubts? None of them trusted their own minds anymore. They huddled together in the main cabin, weapons drawn, watching each other as much as they watched the shadows dot by morning, or what passed for morning in this alien world. They were a fractured team. Trust had eroded, replaced by suspicion and dread. Yet amidst the chaos, one thing became clear: they couldn't stay on the ship. Whatever was happening, it was feeding off their fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. If they wanted to survive, they needed to act. Elias made the call. "We can't fight it head on," he said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion etched on his face. "But maybe we can outrun it. We'll head back to the research outpost we found earlier. There might be supplies, shelter, something to give us an edge. No one argued. They didn't have a choice. Gathering what little gear they could carry, they prepared to leave the relative safety of the Iron Gale and venture back into the green hell of Kepler 942b. As they stepped outside, the forest greeted them with its eerie glow. The ground pulsed faintly beneath their boots, almost like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a low growl rumbled through the trees. The journey back to the research outpost was anything but smooth. The crew trudged through the glowing fungal forest, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, mossy ground that seemed almost alive beneath them. Every step felt heavier than the last, not just because of the thick atmosphere, but also because of the weight of fear pressing down on them. They had left the Iron Gale behind, hoping to escape the entity haunting the ship, but out here in the open, they felt even more exposed. The forest loomed around them, its towering fungi casting eerie shadows that danced in the dim green light. Elias led the group, clutching a makeshift weapon, a metal pipe he'd grabbed from the ship's tool locker. He didn't know if it would do any good against something as unnatural as the creature they'd encountered, but having something solid in his hands made him feel less helpless. Behind him, Myra carried a portable scanner, her eyes darting between the device and the surrounding trees. She was determined to find some kind of explanation for what was happening, even though logic seemed to have abandoned them long ago. Rin brought up the rear, her flashlight cutting through the gloom as she scanned the darkness for movement. Her usual bravado had been replaced by a tense alertness. Her jaw clenched tight. Jox walked near the middle of the group, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't said much since they'd left the ship, but his mind was racing. The biologist in him wanted to understand the planet's ecosystem, to make sense of the impossible things they were witnessing. But another part of him, the part that knew secrets he hadn't shared with the others, was screaming at him to run. Run far and fast, because he recognized the signs. This wasn't just an alien world. It was intelligent, adaptive, and dangerous. And it was watching them dob as they moved deeper into the forest. The whispers returned. At first, they were faint, like the rustling of leaves or the distant hum of insects. But soon the voices grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of languages. None of them understood. It was as if the planet itself was speaking, taunting them. Mara stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to signal the others to halt. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias nodded grimly. "Yeah, it's getting closer." They pressed on, quickening their pace despite the exhaustion gnawing at their bodies. The glowing rivers they'd seen earlier crisscrossed the landscape, their surfaces shimmering unnaturally. One of them blocked their path, forcing them to detour. As they approached the water, Elias noticed something strange. The liquid pulsed rhythmically, almost like it was breathing. He hesitated, staring at it, until Rin nudged him forward. "Don't stop," she urged. "We don't have time to gawk." But Jox lingered for a moment, crouching beside the riverbank. He dipped his fingers into the glowing liquid cautiously, pulling them back quickly when the substance clung to his skin like syrup. His expression darkened. "This isn't water," he muttered. "It's alive." He wiped his hand on his jacket, leaving a faint smear of luminescent residue. No one asked him to elaborate. They didn't need to. The further they went, the more distorted reality became. Trees seemed to shift positions when they weren't looking directly at them. Shadows stretched impossibly long, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. Once, Rin swore she saw a figure standing among the fungi, its silhouette humanoid yet wrong somehow. When she pointed it out, the others turned to look, but by then it was gone. "I'm telling you, I saw something," she insisted, her voice rising in frustration. "Keep your voice down," Elias snapped, glancing nervously around them. "We don't want to draw attention." The tension in the group was palpable now. Each of them was on edge, jumping at every sound, every flicker of movement. They were all thinking the same thing. How much longer could they keep this up? How much farther did they have to go before reaching the outpost? Finally, after what felt like hours, they spotted it in the distance, a cluster of prefab structures half buried in the undergrowth. The research outpost. Relief washed over them briefly, but it was short-lived. As they drew closer, they realized the place was in shambles. Windows were shattered, doors hung off their hinges, and vines had begun reclaiming the buildings. Whatever happened here, it hadn't ended well. Inside the largest structure, they found remnants of the researchers' final days. Desks were overturned, papers scattered across the floor. Monitors displayed static, their screens cracked and useless. But what caught their attention most were the walls. Someone had scrawled messages in jagged handwriting using what looked like blood. "It knows we're here," read one. "Don't let it follow you," warned another. And then in bold letters dripping with desperation, "Burn everything," Myra frowned, running her fingers over the words. "What does that mean? Burn? What?" Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered. Not just once, but repeatedly, plunging the room into brief moments of darkness. In those flashes they saw it, or rather felt it, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of perception. It wasn't visible, not exactly, but it filled the space with an overwhelming sense of dread. Elias tightened his grip on the metal pipe, his knuckles white. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice low and steady. They began searching the outpost, hoping to find supplies or clues about what had happened to the previous team. In one corner of the main lab, Jocks discovered a series of journals. Flipping through them, he pieced together the story. The researchers had been studying the planet's unique ecosystem, attempting to harness its biomechanical properties. At first, their experiments yielded promising results. But then something changed. The entity, the Deathworlder, had reacted violently to their interference. What started as minor malfunctions escalated into full-blown attacks. By the time the researchers realized their mistake, it was too late. The Deathworlder had evolved, becoming something far more dangerous. "This thing isn't just a predator," Jocks explained, holding up one of the journals. "It's adaptive. It learns from us, feeds on our emotions. Fear makes it stronger." "Well, that's just great," Rin muttered sarcastically. "So, basically, we're screwed." Elias shook his head. "Not yet. If it thrives on fear, then we can't let it win. We hold our ground." Easier said than done. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The temperature dropped sharply, sending chills down their spines. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that mocked them. Then came the visions. Each of them experienced it differently. For Elias, it was his daughter again, her tear-streaked face appearing in the reflection of a broken mirror. She begged him to save her, her voice breaking his heart all over again. Myra saw her brother reaching out to her from the depths of a glowing river, his mouth moving silently as if trying to warn her. Rin relived the death of her mentor, a veteran pilot who had sacrificed himself to protect her during a mission gone wrong. And Jocks saw fragments of his past experiments, the faces of colleagues he'd failed to save, their accusing stares burning into his soul. When the visions subsided, they were shaken but still standing. Somehow, they managed to pull themselves together, clinging to the fragile thread of hope that survival was still possible. They barricaded the doors, reinforcing them with whatever furniture they could drag into place. Myra rigged a crude alarm system using wires and scrap metal, while Rin kept watch by the windows, her flashlight trained on the forest outside. Night fell, or at least what passed for night on this godforsaken planet. The bioluminescent glow dimmed slightly, casting the outpost in an unsettling twilight. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling or the distant howl of unseen creatures. None of them slept. Sleep was a luxury they couldn't afford, not with the Deathworlder lurking just beyond their fragile defenses. As the hours dragged on, Jocks finally spoke up. "There's something I need to tell you," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I've dealt with entities like this before. They're not bound by physical laws. They exist in the spaces between, feeding on chaos and emotion. If we don't stop it here, it won't stay contained to this planet. It'll spread." The others stared at him, stunned. "You knew about this?" Myra demanded, her voice sharp with anger. And you didn't think to mention it earlier? I didn't want to believe it, Jocks replied, lowering his gaze. But now I know. This is my fault. My experiments helped create things like this. And if we don't end it, it'll consume everything. For a moment, no one said anything. The weight of his confession hung heavy in the air. Finally, Elias broke the silence. Then we ended. Together. But as dawn approached, bringing with it a faint green glow filtering through the cracks in the walls, they realized the battle was far from over. Something was stirring outside, moving steadily closer. The ground vibrated faintly beneath their feet, a rhythmic pulsing that matched the beat of their racing hearts. Whatever was coming, it was big. And it was angry. The Deathworlder had found them. The vibrations beneath their feet grew stronger, shaking the walls of the outpost. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the ground pulsed in rhythm with something approaching, a slow, deliberate beat that felt like the planet itself was breathing. Outside, the forest seemed to come alive. The glowing fungi dimmed, plunging the area into an unnatural twilight. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and writhing as if they had minds of their own. The air thickened, pressing down on them, making it hard to breathe. Elias clenched his makeshift weapon tighter, his knuckles white. He glanced at the others, trying to mask the fear creeping into his chest. "Whatever's coming, we don't run," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "We hold our ground." Myra nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the crude alarm system she'd rigged. "If this thing wants us, it'll have to work for it," she muttered under her breath, though her wide eyes betrayed her bravado. Rin stood by the barricaded door, her flashlight beam steady despite the slight tremor in her grip. She scanned the darkness beyond the cracks in the wall, searching for movement. Jock sat hunched in a corner, staring at the floor, his face pale and drawn. Guilt weighed heavily on him, but there was no time to dwell on regrets. Survival came first, or so he kept telling himself. Then it happened. A deafening roar shattered the stillness, reverberating through the outpost like thunder. The sound wasn't animalistic. It was mechanical yet organic, a guttural scream that seemed to pierce straight into their skulls. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding in unison. The vibrations intensified, and the walls groaned under the strain. Something massive slammed against the barricade, splintering the wood and metal reinforcements. Dust filled the room as chunks of debris tumbled down. "We can't stay here!" Rin shouted over the chaos, backing away from the crumbling entrance. "Yes, we can," Elias shot back, stepping forward defiantly. "If we scatter, it picks us off one by one. We fight together or not at all." Jocks finally stirred, rising shakily to his feet. His voice was barely audible over the noise outside, but his words carried weight. "It's testing us," he said, his tone hollow. "This isn't just an attack, it's learning. Every move we make feeds it more information." "Great." Myra snapped, her frustration boiling over. "So what do you suggest? Sit here and let it eat us?" "No," Jocks replied, his gaze hardening. "We overload the reactor." For a moment, no one spoke. The idea hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Overloading the reactor would generate an electromagnetic pulse, powerful enough to disrupt the entity's connection to the planet, at least temporarily. But doing so would mean sacrificing the outpost and everything inside it, including themselves if they didn't escape in time. Worse, someone would have to stay behind to manually trigger the M sequence, ensuring the timing was precise. It was a suicide mission. "I'll do it," Rin volunteered suddenly, her voice firm. Despite the fear etched on her face, all eyes turned to her, surprised by her resolve. She avoided meeting their stares, focusing instead on the barricade shaking violently just a few feet away. "You guys need to get out of here. Someone has to make sure this thing doesn't follow." "You," Elias stepped toward her, shaking his head. "No way. We're not leaving anyone behind." "You don't have a choice," Rin shot back, her temper flaring. "Look around. If we all stay, none of us survive. At least this way, some of you might make it." Myra opened her mouth to argue, but Jocks cut her off. "She's right," he said quietly, his expression grim. "One of us has to stay." And If anyone can pull this off, it's Rin. Rin gave him a small, grateful nod before turning to the others. Her usual sarcasm and bravado were gone, replaced by a quiet determination. "Just promise me one thing," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Don't screw this up. Get out of here and tell people what happened. Make sure no one else comes back to this hellhole." Before anyone could respond, another bone-rattling impact sent debris raining down from the ceiling. The barricade wouldn't hold much longer. There was no time left for arguments or goodbyes. Elias hesitated only a moment before nodding sharply. "Do what you have to do," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll make sure your sacrifice counts." With that, the group split up. Rin stayed behind, heading toward the outpost control room where the reactor was housed. The others moved quickly, grabbing whatever supplies they could carry and preparing to flee into the forest once the MP went off. As they exited the building, the scene outside was chaos incarnate. The ground rippled like waves, and the fungal trees bent impossibly low, their glowing caps flickering erratically. In the distance, they saw it, a monstrous amalgamation of flesh and machinery, towering over the landscape. Its body was a patchwork of twisted limbs, jagged spines, and pulsating veins, glowing faintly with the same green light that permeated the planet. It wasn't just a creature, it was the embodiment of the Deathworlder itself. Elias led the way, pushing through the dense undergrowth as fast as they could manage. Behind them, the outpost loomed ominously, its structure creaking and groaning. Under the assault? They didn't look back until a blinding flash of light erupted, bathing the forest in a searing brilliance. The EMP detonated with a deafening crack, sending shockwaves rippling through the air. For a brief moment, everything went silent, the whispers, the growls, the unsettling hum of the planet all silenced, but the relief was short-lived. When the light faded, the monster staggered but didn't collapse. Its form shifted and contorted, adapting to the disruption. Though weakened, it was far from defeated. Worse, the EMP had fried most of their remaining equipment, leaving them blind and vulnerable. Without working scanners or comms, navigating the forest became even more perilous. Hours passed as they trudged onward, their bodies pushed to the brink of exhaustion. The eerie glow of the planet returned, casting long shadows that danced menacingly around them. Every step felt heavier than the last, both physically and emotionally. They knew Rin hadn't survived the explosion her sacrifice had bought them precious minutes, but guilt weighed heavily on each of them. They owed it to her to keep moving, to find a way out. Finally, just as dawn began to break, they stumbled upon the abandoned shuttle that had brought the original research team to Kepler 942b. It was battered and half buried in vines, but miraculously, it still had power. Myra worked frantically to repair the damaged systems while Elias and Jox kept watch, scanning the horizon for any sign of the Deathworlder. The tension was unbearable, every rustle of leaves sending jolts of panic through their already frayed nerves. When Myra finally gave the okay, they climbed aboard, strapping themselves in for takeoff. The engines sputtered to life, protesting loudly as the shuttle lifted off the ground. Below them, the forest stretched endlessly, its glowing rivers and fungal forests fading into the distance. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves a glimmer of hope. They were leaving the nightmare behind, or so they thought. As the shuttle ascended, Elias noticed something strange. On the monitor displaying external footage, tiny tendrils of alien biomass clung to the hull, glowing faintly green. He leaned closer, squinting at the screen. "What the hell is that?" he murmured, pointing it out to the others. Jox's face drained of color. "It followed us," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's not done." The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. The Deathworlder hadn't been defeated, it evolved again, finding a way to hitch a ride. Now, trapped in the confines of the shuttle, they faced an even greater question. How far would it go? And how long until it consumed them completely? Exhaustion and despair settled over the group as the shuttle drifted further into space. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the hum of the engines and the distant echo of Rin's final words. Had they escaped the planet, or had they merely carried its curse with them? The shuttle drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly as it carried the survivors further from Kepler 942b inside. The mood was somber, heavy with exhaustion and the weight of what they had endured and lost. The glowing tendrils clinging to the hull outside were a constant reminder that their nightmare wasn't over. They had escaped the planet, but the Deathworlder had found a way to follow them. Elias sat in the pilot's seat, his hands gripping the controls, even though there was nothing he could do to steer them away from the creeping dread that loomed over them. His eyes were fixed on the monitor showing the external feed. The alien biomass seemed to pulse faintly, almost like it was alive. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them, waiting for something or someone to slip up. Myra worked tirelessly at the back of the shuttle, trying to jury-rig some kind of containment system using scraps from their limited supplies. Her fingers moved quickly, her mind racing as she pieced together makeshift tools and wiring. If we can isolate whatever's attached to the hull, maybe we can cut it off before it spreads, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. But deep down, she knew how slim their chances were. This thing didn't play by normal rules. It adapted, evolved, and thrived in situations where survival should have been impossible. Jock sat hunched in a corner, staring blankly at the floor. His guilt was eating him alive. He had kept secrets, made mistakes, and now those choices had cost lives, including Rin's. The memory of her final moments haunted him, her determination, her sacrifice, and the unspoken plea in her voice when she asked them to make sure no one else came back to that hellish planet. And yet, here they were, carrying the very threat they had tried so desperately to escape. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked suddenly, breaking the suffocating silence. His tone was softer than usual, tinged with concern rather than frustration. Jock hesitated before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm thinking about what happens next. This thing. It's not just a parasite or some alien predator, it's intelligent. It learns if it gets loose, it won't stop until it consumes everything." Elias frowned, leaning back in his chair. "You're saying this isn't just about us anymore?" "No," Jock replied sharply, his gaze hardening. "It never was. That planet was its home, but it doesn't need boundaries. It feeds on fear, chaos, destruction. Once it breaks free, it'll spread to other ships, other planets, everywhere." The words hung in the air, chilling everyone to the bone. For a moment, no one said anything. The implications were too horrifying to fully grasp. They weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for the survival of countless others who had no idea what was coming. Myra slammed her fist against the wall in frustration. "So what do we do? Sit here and wait for it to burst through the walls? Because if that's the plan, I'd rather go out swinging." "There's another option," Jock said quietly, drawing everyone's attention. His expression was grim, resigned. "We vent the shuttle." For a long moment no one reacted. Then Elias leaned forward, his face etched with disbelief. "You want us to throw ourselves into space?" "It's the only way," Jock insisted, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "This thing survives in extreme conditions. It thrives on adaptation. But vacuum exposure might kill it, or at least slow it down enough for someone else to deal with it later." "And what about us?" Myra snapped, her voice rising. "We don't exactly thrive in vacuums either." "We wouldn't last long," Jock admitted bluntly. "But if we time it right, if we seal off the compartment where the biomass is concentrated, we might buy ourselves a few extra minutes. Enough time to send out a warning, at least." Elias stared at him, torn between anger and resignation. "A warning? To who? Even if we manage to send a message, who's going to believe us? We barely survived telling each other what happened." "Someone has to try," Jock shot back, his voice cracking under the strain. "If we don't, then all of this, everything we went through, everyone we lost, it's for nothing." The argument simmered for a while, each of them wrestling with the reality of their situation. There were no good options left, only degrees of bad ones. Finally, Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, let's do it. But we make sure the message gets out first, whatever happens after that." Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. They worked quickly, pooling their remaining strength to prepare the shuttle for what might be their final act. Myra rigged the ventilation system to create a controlled breach in the compartment housing the alien biomass. Elias recorded a detailed log of everything they had encountered, embedding coordinates, sensor readings, and warnings about the Deathworlder's capabilities. Jox helped seal off the affected area, his hands trembling as he secured the last hatch. When everything was ready, they gathered in the main cabin, staring at each other with a mixture of fear and quiet resolve. None of them wanted to die, but they all understood the stakes. This wasn't just about saving themselves anymore, it was about stopping something far bigger than any of them. "All right," Elias said finally, his voice firm despite the knot of dread in his stomach. "Let's do this." Myra activated the breach sequence, and the shuttle shuddered violently as the pressure dropped. Alarms blared, drowning out the sound of rushing air. On the monitor, the alien biomass writhed frantically, struggling against the sudden exposure to the vacuum of space. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The pulsing glow dimmed, and the tendrils began to shrivel. But then something changed. The biomass surged outward, latching onto nearby surfaces with surprising speed. It hadn't died. It had adapted. In seconds, it breached the sealed compartment, spreading toward the main cabin. Panic set in as the crew realized their plan had failed. "There's no time," Jock shouted, grabbing the emergency beacon. With shaking hands, he transmitted the warning message into the void, hoping against hope that someone somewhere would hear it. "Kepler 942b is alive. The Deathworlder moves. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach." As the biomass closed, and Elias made the call, "Brace yourselves," he yelled, initiating an emergency separation protocol. The shuttle split apart, ejecting the infected section into space. The maneuver threw them violently off course, sending the remaining compartments spiraling into darkness. When the chaos subsided, silence filled the cabin. The three survivors sat slumped in their seats, battered and breathless. Outside, the stars twinkled coldly, indifferent to their plight. They had done everything they could, but none of them believed it would be enough. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time blurred together in the endless void. Exhaustion claimed them one by one, leaving only fleeting moments of consciousness. When Elias woke briefly, he noticed something moving in the shadows near the vents. A faint glow, green and sickly, pulsed weakly. He reached for his weapon, but his body refused to obey. Darkness swallowed him again. When rescue teams eventually found the derelict shuttle weeks later, they discovered no signs of life aboard. Only a single, glowing tendril, clinging stubbornly to the wreckage, hinted at the horrors that had unfolded. Back at command headquarters, analysts reviewed the garbled transmission received from the beacon. Most dismissed it as static or interference, but a few listened closely, hearing fragments of a chilling message. Warning ignored. "Deathworlder moves.